Hello everybody! Welcome to week 3 of Overlooked October. This week's theme is slasher horror, and today we'll be looking at a remake of a horror classic which I believe gets an unfair amount of hate. And that one is 2009's Friday the 13th. You all are familiar with Friday the 13th one way or another. How could you not be? It's a franchise with 12 movies, a TV series, video games, and of course our main man Jason Voorhees is a horror icon. Donning a hockey mask and machete, Jason has been one of the most notable figures in not just horror, but cinema and television as a whole. Even if you're not familiar with the franchise whatsoever, you've still seen him around, even if it's been through parodies. It's funny to note though that the Jason we know of wasn't actually in the original 1980 movie. It's only in the sequels did he start showing up. In the original, mysterious figure that isn't Jason goes around killing camp counselors one by one, primarily off screen. It isn't as eventful and is actually kind of boring when revisiting the franchise because when we think of Friday the 13th, we think of Jason and not, well, let me just spoil it. You've all had like 40 years to watch this anyways. The killer is Jason's mother, who kills the camp counselors of Camp Crystal Lake because she's all peeved her son drowned in the lake or something. The twist actually feels thrown in at the last minute because Jason's mom is introduced very late into the movie and acts all strange. She suffers death by decapitation at the end by the remaining camp counselor who escapes. Is that the end of it? Of course it isn't. We got sequel upon sequel where Jason is somehow alive and always comes back. I'm not going to get into all of them here because that would take too long. This franchise throws continuity out the window several times in every installment. We all know the underlying reason Jason and many slashers keep coming back, and that's due to the studio seeing a great return on investment. This remake is actually the highest grossing movie of the franchise. Now, I know what you're thinking, why are you reviewing this movie when it's not a financial flop like the past 2 movies we covered were? It's because I feel like this movie went unappreciated by fans just because it was a remake. The main reason slashers garner so much popularity is not just the mythos of them, but also the kills. If your movie doesn't have good kills or blood being shed in a memorable way, then it's a dud. What really put a crutch on slasher movies back in the late 20th century was how much the MPAA had a rule on what's acceptable for an R-rated movie. If there are scenes deemed too extreme and could warrant an X rating, the studio wouldn't gain much money for it. Over the years, they let up on the rulings and what constitutes what rating, but just remember, if you drop 2 F-bombs, looks like you still get slapped with that R rating. So with the first movie not being some sort of sacred ground for horror in the same way other movies are, the MPAA allowing for more in the way of carnage and sex, and a bigger budget from a studio, a remake doesn't feel all that out of place for Friday the 13th. Because let's face it, anyone that came after Gen X are not going to be actively searching out for these main 10 entries of the franchise and thoroughly enjoying them unless they're crazy like me. The crossover entry Freddy vs. Jason is still enjoyed by a lot of horror fans, but that's besides the point. The best remakes use the opportunity of taking their foundation and creating their vision of a better, updated model. In terms of film, there are so many ways to twist and mold your own version without it being a total retread of the old movie. Unfortunately, when studios only care about the money, you usually do get an uninspired rehash that doesn't try much if the director doesn't have ideas. The main offender of this in horror is the remake of Psycho in 1998, where it's a shot-for-shot remake only in Technicolor this time, because black and white is so boring. Now, I'd like to bring up the studio behind this remake, which is Michael Bay's Platinum Dunes. While they now have their fair share of original IPs, they started off with remaking movies like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Hitcher, and A Nightmare on Elm Street. All received dismal reviews from critics, but still made a boatload of money back at the box office. I know a lot of people would groan and wave their fist in the air at these remakes, but sometimes the thought of these remakes can be intriguing. If I told you I was remaking A Nightmare on Elm Street, what goes through your head? Is it the fear that the old becomes obsolete? Will it tarnish the reputation of the franchise? Will it seize the opportunity to scare us using new technology? Because, let's face it, the original Nightmare on Elm Street hasn't aged all that well. While it's a real staple in horror history, there's room for improvement if creativity is allowed to shine. Think of how cool some dream sequences would look like if it was in the hands of the right director. How gruesome the kills could potentially be when they literally could be the stuff of nightmares. So with that little glimmer of hope, 2010's A Nightmare on Elm Street had potential to revive that franchise, but unfortunately with an inexperienced director, lackluster script, and actors feeling like they didn't even want to be there half the time, it stunk. It was a cash grab and it took the money and faded away from people's minds, only ever really coming up when someone talks about that franchise as a whole. Despite the duds Platinum Dunes churned out early in its life, 2009's Friday the 13th felt different. The kills felt like they were all unique, some of them being extremely gruesome in their execution and presentation. What I found interesting in this movie is that it picks elements from the first 4 Friday the 13th movies and combines them together in this remake. I like that we basically get the original movie's story told while the intro credits are rolling. The burlap sack look from part 2 shows early on in the movie, as well as one character resembling Jason's mother, discovering the hockey mask later on like in part 3, and having a group holding up in a large cabin like in part 4. All those movies are not perfect whatsoever, but I'm kinda glad this team could provide some fan service by trimming the most interesting parts of those movies to create this. Now granted, this movie is still filled with dumb characters, cliches that still plague this genre, and some of the most embarrassing dialogue you'll hear in quite a while.
You got perfect nipple placement, baby.
However, we still have some leads that make this enjoyable. The characters of Clay, Jenna, and Whitney make this movie actually have people to root for. It's not just a bunch of toked out, drunk college kids running around this movie. While most of the characters in this movie aren't memorable in the slightest, how they're killed sure is. Even after not seeing this movie for years, I was still surprised when rewatching it how much I remembered. The long opening of this movie just shows how much of a threat this version of Jason can be. Instead of seeing a hulking figure that rarely runs after his victims, this one feels like pure adrenaline. The way Jason slaughters his victims in this 22-minute opening left me feeling anxious. When the title card hits, you don't even realize how much time has passed. This leads us into the setup for the story. A month later, Clay is looking for his sister, Whitney, who was seen in the opening credits. He investigates the town and passes out as many flyers as he can. Much to the dismay of the locals and even the policemen, he still keeps pushing to try and find his sister. Aside from that, we're introduced to the body count, who all have their obnoxious moments.
That's not a good look for you, man. You gonna ask the one black guy to pump the gas for you?
In my next life, I want to come back as one of the buttons on the ass pocket of her jean short.
How about I pay you pump? Sure, man. Hey, I give a wicked blowjob too.
Like I said, dumb characters. However, if you've already seen a handful of slasher movies, you're kind of expecting this. We need kills one way or another, so I guess the idea behind these movies is that if the characters are absolute dopes or dickheads, you won't feel bad that they die off. Now, while the story isn't too complex, it deviates from the old movie setup and is doing something different. I do like that we get a sense of the locals knowing that Jason is still out there, not lingering too much on retelling the story of Jason, and not someone having a plot to reopen the camp again. Everybody's just looking for that sweet devil's lettuce and having a killer time in this one. This movie could have easily been phoned in, because all you really have to do is show some slashes and stabs with a machete for most of the movie. Most of the time, to cut costs, these would be off screen and the dead bodies would be discovered later, but with cool makeup. But this movie decides to bring out a whole arsenal for Jason to use. Instead of just using a machete, he wields an axe, bow, bear traps, spears, and uses the environment to his advantage. I like to think that after our little brief opening actually showing that Jason saw his mother beheaded when he was a kid, that he somehow learned how to survive even through his disabilities. The movie implies in the credits that he heard voices in the form of his mother telling him what to do, so yeah, his mom's voice taught him how to hunt, kill, and survive on the campgrounds for decades. Regardless, the methods of killing in this movie are not as repetitive as they could have been. Also, what many people don't realize is that there actually takes some acting for Jason. Sure, it can't be that hard to play a masked killer, but if you're not playing the part seriously enough, you'll ruin the tension. This Jason never felt like a stand here, swing there type of killer. The only time I ever had a real problem with this for this character is in Freddy vs. Jason, in the scene where if you slow it down just enough, the machete swing actually slows down before cutting to blood splatter. Derek Mears did a great job playing this version of Jason Voorhees, doing the stunts and follow-throughs necessary to keep the viewer immersed. Despite the dialogue being about 60% trashy, I enjoyed some moments involving our main hero Clay going back and forth with the arrogant rich kid Trent.
You don't want to be friends after this? You don't want to hang out?
Let it go, Trent.
It's not me. This guy's being a dick.
Yeah, it's me. Obviously, I'm the one being a dick.
I would probably leave soon before I get pissed off and...
What happens then?
When the cast of characters finally shrinks down to our main leads, I like the third act where we see our final showdown with Jason. It's not something that feels like it drags on with extended chases or moments that make you say, now how the hell did he survive that? Believe me, you'll see that in the ending shot for sure. Despite the obvious problems that aren't unique to this slasher flick, I still enjoyed this one, and it's one I'd call decent for an overall movie, but good for a slasher flick. When I say I recommend this one, I'm mainly talking to fans of the genre. If you find slashers absolutely terrible, chances are this won't change your mind about them. I will say that this remake is better than the original, but that's not saying a whole lot. Overall, you know what you like, so if you want to watch a slasher movie or even get into the Friday the 13th franchise without watching the previous 11 movies, this is not a bad choice. When I think of remakes that worked, this is one of the first that comes to mind. It's different enough and still fresh enough for contemporary audiences to enjoy. Check it out for yourself if you can and have some fun with it. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked the video, please thumbs it up and make sure to subscribe as we still got more movies to cover this October. Tell me what your favorite slasher movie is in the comments. Next week we'll be looking at a found footage horror, and I promise you won't end up feeling like you just got off a tilt-a-whirl after watching it. Thank you for spending a part of your day here at Clintonomo Bay.